So I'm catching up with my good friend and a fellow I don't know, it feels like conspirator, editor, curator of the Uganda 50 archive that we jointly host together. So good evening, Rupal. Thanks for joining me.
Pleasure. Good to
Good,
see you.
good. Yes, good to see you too as well. We see each other a lot more these days, don't we? With your community role at the Belgrave Neighbourhood Cooperative Housing Association as well. So it's good to see you. But now, like I said, we get to talk about our Uganda 50 archive tonight, so that's good.
Can't wait. Looking forward to it.
Well, listen, it's been a while since we've spoken about it, and a lot of the things that we do are influenced by the Uganda 50. Not sure, is it commemoration? Is it celebration, remembrance? You know, we've uncovered quite a lot of trauma as well during that time. I know that's come to the fore as well with some other projects that are in the pipeline and stuff. But I mean, if we go back to sort of 2019 when we were sitting in your garden on a very sunny afternoon, I seem to remember, and we were having a conversation about what are you going to do for the 50th? I remember asking you, and you know, what are you going to do that's different from the 30th and the 40th of what you did for the BBC? I mean, are you, when you look back now, are we sort of doing what you thought we would be doing? Has it changed quite a bit?
It's been beyond my expectations, I think, in terms of everything that has happened this year. For us, it's been really busy. You know, you and I, both sort of with the BBC, our own staff, and with the co-op. So we've done so much around the topic, but also people around the country, you know, focusing a lot on the 50th anniversary. And even now, though, it's been really interesting talking to people and hearing from others who say, actually, you know, why have we never heard this story before? Why have we never you know, heard from our parents or grandparents before? Why is it not being taught in schools? And so even though for perhaps you and I, who've kind of been focusing on the 50th anniversary, there's still a lot of people who don't know a great deal about it. And I think there's still a lot more work to be done. You talked about trauma, and I think for me that is one of the biggest things that has come out of the 50th anniversary. Trauma is not a subject that, you know, I've ever talked about with people when I've gone out to do interviews or whatever. This year, I think for the first time, people have been opening up. For the first time, there are people saying just how difficult that whole experience was. And that, to me, I think I'd never thought about it. You've got to remember, I was only 2, for instance, you know, John, when we came. But it's not a conversation I've ever had with any members of my family, for instance, you know. But I did it. I did that this year, and you've met my sisters now, and you've met my brother, and I've never had those conversations with them before. And it has been really difficult. Yeah. It has been really hard, actually.
Because I remember we were sitting in the garden, we tried to say, didn't we? What could we do, not only together, but what could we do that was different, maybe from what other people were looking to do, or what had been done in the past? And we kind of quickly realised that it tends to very much focus on men. And you know, successful businessmen as well, and the impact of maybe the Golden Mile and things like that, and the community, and of course they've all been done at the 30th and the 40th, and we were thinking about, you know, particularly women and you know, and mothers and daughters. And it was interesting when it came up the other day in one of the meetings that you and I were at on Zoom, and the lady was saying, actually, like, you know, daughters and mothers and the connection, because ultimately women invariably were the first to be able to work due to the amount of factories there were in Leicester, and then obviously daughters going to school, and your sisters were, you know, older than you, teenagers. So if it's not for your mother and your sisters, to an extent, they're the people that you would be talking to as a young girl growing up about, you know, Uganda, you know, your Asian roots as well, you know what I mean, where you're from, keeping culture alive, food, all the things that we were talking about. probably more than a father figure, if you like, or uncles and stuff. You'd be having those conversations about, you know, what it meant to be, you know, a young Asian woman fitting in now. So it all became very much around survival and, you know, racism and food at school, and sort of our bland English food is, I'm sure, as well. And where can we buy some spices so it tastes better, type thing. And that's what, for me, that's one of the things that I've really picked up on, and all the conversations that we've had from, you know, our Sabras Radio hosted community drop-ins in the reception there too that we've done. They've been great. The people centre thing that we did, and even the one at the co-op's headquarters, you know, the people come in and just talking about all those things, but then everybody just feeling that they were able to talk a little bit more about not so much just genuine feelings and impact on weather and food and, you know, racism and all this kind of stuff, but actually it really started getting down into, actually I still think about it, or we never spoke about it, and so therefore it's unresolved trauma. And I guess with a small t, as much as the big trauma, the small trauma is the fact that maybe people have gone, you know, the older generation, and you just feel, well, I've never actually got to ask those questions of people about what did they feel.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like I never got to speak to my parents about it, you know, in those terms. So, but as you say, it's been a revelation in so many ways, this 50th anniversary, and the conversations that we've had, conversations I've heard, whether that's on the radio or through other projects going on around the country, have just been fascinating. And as you say, I think this time, for the first time, people are actually opening up, you know, where it's not just the same story of, you know, the factual story. There's the emotion behind it as well, the stories of survival, and the impact that those journeys have had on families and people's lives. So yeah, I think in that sense, it's been a more open, more honest dialogue with people. And I think both you and I know that there are still people out there who haven't spoken about it, that haven't perhaps either been approached, or perhaps feel a little bit wary about it, because it is so personal. It is, you know, it's a personal journey, and maybe there are people out there who don't want to open up old wounds. You know,
well, I said to someone the other day, they talk about, you know, people, oh, maybe people don't want to open a door on that. I said, I don't think it's a door, it's a trap door. And that's very different. A door you can walk through. A trap door, by its very essence, is by opening it up, you're looking down into something which you've either consciously decided to forget about and move on from. So, you know, even if someone right up to the last day of, you know, seeing the amazing exhibition up at New Leicester Museum on New Walk that Navranga pulled together, you know, fantastic effort there by Nisha and Ranjan and the team, you know, to be able to pull that together. Even if someone on that last day says, I want to tell my story, I know you and I set out to make sure that the Uganda 50 archive was there for them to continue, as I'm sure with many other people that are involved in the project. It's really important to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it has opened the doors to talk about lots of other things as well, you know, talk about, you know, to look at perhaps the journeys from those Ugandan Asians like myself who came to this country, but also look at refugees now, you know, and whether, you know, whether we class ourselves as refugees for a start, you know, remembering that we had British passports, so in theory we weren't refugees, but you know, I've always thought of myself as a refugee because that's what I've always been called, you know. But it's also about opening the doors to opening conversations about now, and perhaps comparisons of how people are treated, you know, were treated then, how they're treated now coming to the UK, and being able to tell their stories, and share their stories and their experiences, and, you know, hopefully that brings some sort of unity together. I know this is, you know, something that we're really keen to do, off the back of all the Uganda stuff, particularly at the Belgrade Neighbourhood Cooperative Housing Association. It's something that we've kind of looked at and we're looking at in terms of, okay, well, where do we go from here? and of course with the recent disorders as well in Leicester. It's like, how do we bring people together? How do we tell those stories and also bring about some sort of understanding and a sense of community? So it's kind of hopefully leading on to a lot more and opening doors and conversations, I think, John.
Yeah, and I think it's also about, there's an authenticity in the conversation now, as opposed to let's all collectively celebrate this and the usual narratives. You know what I mean? You can either, I guess, describe it as either lazy journalism. I think you called it factual journalism earlier, which is, you know, we focus on dates and speeches and large characters like Idi Amin and you know, how many people came and, you know, what Leicester said in the paper and, you know, what people then did, and then you can kind of look at the headlines and, you know, what did people do? And all I spent, you know, 50 years being a, you know, working for the city council or working in Imperial Typewriters, or I've set up a business and I'm very successful on the Golden Mile. So these narratives have always been there. Whereas this time, it just feels that it's kind of everybody's all agreed without anybody saying anything, that it's okay to talk about the fact that it wasn't easy to settle in, and, you know, they were welcomed by a vast majority of people. And it's wonderful to hear some narratives of podcasts that you've captured as well about one lady, I think we played it, didn't we, on the Uganda 50 RSL, the 28-day license that we had with Don Kotak down there at Sabras Radio, which is great. And she used the term exodus. And I thought that was really interesting to use the term exodus, and how grateful she was to Britain for taking them in and looking after them and setting them up and all that sort of stuff. And she just said, you know, we were very lucky because he could have killed us all. And so I think there's a lot of unresolved trauma there, because it wasn't a case of you've got 90 days, get on the airport and Britain will take you. I think this is what Navrang has captured really well for me in the first bit of the exhibition at Leicester Museums on New Walk. When you go in on the left-hand side, is this context to Idi Amin and his little gang of hooligans, if you like, but also the pictures of people queuing at the British consulate, you know, and, you know, hours in the sunshine with the fear of being taken by, you know, bored Ugandan soldiers that would just happen to be walking past, and the amount of people that were killed and taken from that queue. And, you know, the people that arrived here and got to the camp and then kind of died because, you know, the journey was over. I think we're talking about those things a lot more. And I think that humanizes the story away from facts and figures, which we could probably help with a lot of people that are trying to cross the channel at the moment, for example. If we heard their stories rather than where they were from and, you know, why they're coming here, I think, you know, it's something that we could really learn from. And maybe that's where the educational value is.
Absolutely. I absolutely agree with that. And we've been talking to, you know, a lady who, Sophie, who's sort of been talking to students at schools, for instance, and, you know, and she talks a lot about trauma and, you know, going around to the various schools and giving the young people the opportunity to ask those sorts of questions, to, you know, to hear what it was like. And I think hopefully it's a starting point. If nothing else, it's a starting point to open the doors to those conversations, whether that's at home, whether that's, you know, with public bodies, you know, the influencers, the important, you know, the politicians, or whether it's your next door neighbor. You know, I think it's really opened the doors to conversations, people writing, you know, writing about their own experiences or recording their own experiences. And I think this is something you know, I know it's something that you and I don't want to just stop suddenly, because we're hoping that people are going to have heard some of those stories, had some of those conversations, and then go, actually, I'd quite like to record those and for future generations. And hopefully we're going to be there to do that, you know, going forward.
Yeah, I think this is really where the whole activism bit comes in for me, and, you know, maybe why you were a little bit surprised when I invited you to talk in the 16 days of activism, because I think a lot of people think, oh, activism, that's about, you know, going out and protest and doing that. Well, actually, protest is actually, I'm going to put all my memories into a shoebox and do something with it, you know, like give it to a school, or, make sure that this film is seen by, the records office, or, I'm going to put it on the wall of a museum because it's important. And I think for me, activism isn't about the extreme of it. Yeah, it's the fact that you're just interested in doing it. So as much as we were community reporters, I guess, with Citizens Eye, it's about, are you a community archivist? Are you a community activist? It's not about being radical. Maybe it's radical in the fact that you're just wanting to remember something.
Yeah, absolutely. And I had never thought of it that way, but you're absolutely right. It is about those little things, isn't it, that hopefully pave the way for something better going forward.
Mm. I think also locally you've got, like Rushy Mead, and you've got Mellor. And, I mean, I know you've been is it Mellor you went into and you spoke at Mellor, or was it Rushy Mead that you went to?
Yeah,
I think
Rushy Mead.
it was Rushy Mead, wasn't it? And, all the teachers were quite surprised, and the students and all that sort of stuff. Well, we've had since 1972, in the area, whatever the school was, or schools, primary or secondary, that catered for that area would have had, a large number, a predominant number of students that had come from a Ugandan Asian. Either they had that memory, or they were from a family that had that memory. They were first generation, second generation. And so it is actually part of the narrative, the DNA of the area, is the arrival of a large body of people who predominantly settled, for those that were in Leicester, in that area. And so it's real. It doesn't get any more real than that, does it?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I just remember it wasn't Rushy Mead, it was actually Moat Community College, because that's
sorry, yeah.
My fault. But yeah, I mean, it was fascinating to just kind of go back to my old school and have this, I think it was 15-20 minutes, I can't even remember how long it was. And and the school, the makeup of the school has changed so dramatically from when I was there, and when it first opened. And it was I think I was quite sad in one sense to hear from the teachers to say, actually, we don't actually know anything about this. We don't actually teach anything about this story. And to think that, yeah, we've been here since 1972, and it's not a story that's been taught or talked about in schools, really surprised me. It really, really did surprise me. And I know that there are people now that, particularly, I think after this year, are saying that we need to do something about that. We need the conversation, it needs to be part of the curriculum in some shape or form. And I know there are people that are sort of actively working on trying to make that happen. And I think particularly here in Leicester, it's so important, so poignant, because, as you say, there's a large percentage of Ugandan Asians that settled here and have made Leicester their home. And to not know that part of the history of the city and the county is quite sad, to be honest.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree. I think one of the main stories that sticks out for me is meeting Ibrahim and Satpal from Wakeley School. You know what I mean? And just talking to those guys who were, in attendance at this school that opened for 2 years and has gone. It lasted for that 2 years. I think it was in Moat, wasn't it? Moat Community College.
It
was
was
Crown Hills, was it? Crown Hills? Yeah, in the grounds of Crown Hills, and then became part of it. There's kind of porter cabins that were put up, quite a lot of money, over £1 million by the city council at the time. Considering that it said that it didn't want anybody to come, it was quite ironic that they would then find this money to put these sort of 300 pupils in this school. But the thing that really came out of that is I think they've found about half of them now, which is wonderful. So hopefully they'll have a reunion at some point in the summer of next year in 2023. But just talking to those guys and helping them to have that stall that they had. Don Kotak kindly gave them a stall, that the sort of community Mellor that weekend in the summer, was just seeing when people were coming down, hearing us on the radio, obviously you and I, and coming down, and they'd heard that their school was represented. That chap turned up, and he was in tears, and his wife was saying, look, he literally leapt out of his chair this morning and heard his school mentioned and said, we need to go to the park. Let's go to the park. It was wonderful. And so it all got quite emotional, you know what I mean, in their little sort of tent area, and so much excitement. And you can see that in the photos, people meeting people they'd literally not seen for like nearly 50 years, was the fact that when you then started talking to them, and they've had like 2 children, 3 children, 5 children, or no children, but their brother had 3 kids or whatever, that suddenly you realize that and they'd all gone on and done things, you know what I mean? And there was I think there was a pilot, and then there was like someone who was working in insurance and a bank and stuff like that. And you suddenly think, well, from this group of people that came, there was nothing about no one sat around doing nothing. They all seized the opportunity that was given to them, probably somewhat begrudgingly, depending on which way you come at it. And certainly, some of the horrific stories of people in the queue and how they got treated when they got in the British consulate to, get a British passport, which they were entitled to, as you said, not refugees, you had British passports, was the fact that people had gone on and contributed to society, and were making society better as doctors, and paying tax and all this sort of stuff. And you tell me, go, well, that's the impact of refugees, really. It's never the headlines. It's always look at those headlines that are written emblazoned across the wall, with your Enap Powell's and Ted Heath on the wall. When I went up at Newark, when we took the grandson up there again over the weekend, and we popped up there and had a look in preparation for today. Massive images of these people that are well known for things that they've said and done, and all the headlines of the newspaper. And you say, well, where's the economic impact, of your average Ugandan Asian on Leicester? Because that area would definitely not look like that. Because I mean, even the houses that were due to be knocked down were saved by your co-op, weren't they?
Yeah, and
they still exist.
Yeah, those that still exist, absolutely. Because, and again, it's another part of the story that people aren't necessarily aware of as much. The co-op was responsible for, or certainly members of the co-op were responsible for keeping those houses that were to be demolished standing, and a lot of them still are today. And we have over, or just under 400 properties with over 500 people that live in them. But again, so it's part of the story that you don't always hear about and know about.
Yeah, people go for the, like I said, the facts and the headlines, as opposed to the sort of the impact of 500 people or those 400 properties still being in existence. Okay, let me bring it to a close now. The 60th anniversary. I'll still be 28, and I'm not sure how old you'll be then, but well, we could work it out, because you did give your age away for those that want to go back and watch the beginning again. I don't know why you did that. I didn't think you'd do that, but yeah. So the 60th anniversary. How different will that look? Obviously, we've got a memorial that's come in that'll be hopefully up and running next summer. So there's a kind of commemoration point, if you like, in the 51st year. What do you think the 60th will look like? How would you like it to look, maybe?
Gosh, that's a hard one. That's a really difficult. I'd like it I'd like more people to be aware of it in the first place. From the impact of the 50th, I certainly hope, and to be able to capture as many stories as possible by that time, and something that is marked, going forward in some shape
on
or
that
form.
at that time. Yeah.
But on a national, international scale, and I think with the efforts of various people, not only here in Leicester, but in London and further afield, I think hopefully going forward there is some sort of commemoration, acknowledgement of the next big anniversary in some shape.
Yeah, I think for
and
me,
educationally as well.
Yeah, for me, as I was going to say, I think for me the 60th is it's the week before the 60th anniversary, and a grandparent looking after a kid says, "Oh, there's you know, at the memorial we walk past all the time on the way into town, or we drive past round the roundabout. There's a commemoration there, and it's about Uganda Asians that came here. You know, me and your grandma came here in 1972." And the kid goes, "Yeah, we've been doing that at school." That'd be cool.
Yeah.
Something simple like that. Nothing rocket science. Just yeah, we do that at school. And I want the grandparent to be shocked. That's what I think, you know what I mean? Because every grandparent thinks, Henry VIII, yeah, he had eight wives. I'm sure you're not really learning about, you know, stamina or anything like that. Why did he do that? So it'll all be, I think that'd be nice. That would, for me, at the age of 66, as I'll be then, there you go, give my age away. It would be wonderful to have a conversation, bump into someone, one of the Wakeley school guys, to turn around and say one of their members said, their grandchild said this to them because it was in a school, and you think you played a small part in just changing the narrative of what it's about, from, you know, a moment in history that you will always be part of, that significant moment. And that really came out, hasn't it, in some of our podcast interviews with people. So, you know, people bringing suitcases or ID photos and stuff as they did. I remember just some amazing personal stories, and it's a real privilege to hear that stuff. It's just change that narrative and make them feel as if it's something that happened, but, you know, something's come out of it.
Yeah, absolutely agree with that.
Cool. Okay, thanks for talking to me.
Pleasure.
See you soon.
Bye.